I am the Lord, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun, from the west, there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make well-being, create calamity. I am the Lord who does all these things. Shower, O heavens, from above. Let the clouds rain down righteousness. Let the earth be opened, that salvation and righteousness may bear fruit. Let the earth cause them both to sprout. I, the Lord, have created it. Woe to him who strives with me, who formed whom? A pot among earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who forms it, what are you making? Or your work has no handles? Woe to him who says to a father, what are you begetting? Or to a woman, what are you to labor? Thus says the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, the one who formed him. Ask me things to come. Will you command me concerning my children, the work of my hands? I made the earth and created man on it. It was my hands that stretched out the heavens and commanded all their hosts. It's good to see you today. It's good to be with you this morning. I hope that you came and worship to God in a heart that is ready to give full worship to God and love Him and try to use this time to make your life just a little bit more like He would want your life to look like. If you have your Bibles, open to Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 4. And why don't you do that? I want to pose a question to you. Who do you think understood God's sovereignty than anyone else in the Bible? Who do you think understood God's sovereignty more than anyone else in the Bible? I'll give you a hint. He wrote part of the Bible. And if you haven't guessed it from what Daniel chapter 4 says, I would say someone that knew God's sovereignty more than anyone else in the Bible was Nebuchadnezzar, which probably wasn't the first thought that comes to mind as you think about all the great people in the Bible. But I think he knew God's sovereignty over creation, over the earth, and especially over him because of this story that we're going to look at in Daniel chapter 4. And look at how he opens this phrase, this story. Verse 1, Daniel chapter 4, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good for me to show the signs and the wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty is his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. That is how Nebuchadnezzar starts this chapter. And he'll go on to retell how he came to this opinion of God. The story that led him to understand that God is a God with an everlasting dominion, whose dominion endures forever. He retells this story. But it is totally a different picture from the Nebuchadnezzar that we'd seen in the previous chapters of Daniel. We'd seen him just in the last chapter, we'd seen him put up this great image of either himself or of a God that I think would also glorify himself, and said that anyone who does not bow before this image is immediately thrown into the fiery furnace. And when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refuse to do such a thing, he tosses them into the fiery furnace, giving no thought to this God that he just proclaimed as the Most High. And from that, of course, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saved, and he understands a little bit more about God. But Nebuchadnezzar's pride has always been a part of him. He was the king of the biggest and baddest and most influential and most prosperous empire to ever exist on the face of the world up until this time. And so he thought quite a bit about himself. He had pride in everything he said, everything he did. He just thought that in chapter 2, when people could not tell him what he dreamed about, that he would just start killing people. That's how much he thought of himself and of his kingdom. And there was a lot of things that I could do with this chapter. In fact, I was very sad to not be able to explore everything I wanted to in this chapter, because I think there's a lot of stuff with Genesis 1, and they talk about dream here of a tree. And I think there's some references to the mustard seed tree Jesus talks about, and some stump with this stump of Jesse, which will produce the great tree, which will be Jesus. I think there's a lot of stuff here. But I wanted to focus on just one thing, because I didn't want to keep you here for an hour. And that is pride. Pride is something that is kind of hard to recognize in us, because those who have it don't think they have it, and those who do think they have it are kind of showing that they do not have it. It is one of those things that is super hard to preach on because of that. And so for the sake of this sermon and for today, just consider the possibility that you may have a problem with pride. Just on the surface, everyone here, just kind of say, okay, do I have a problem with pride? Let me use this time as a way to look at my life and see if I have that problem. And then we'll see if you do. And if you're unwilling to do that, it may show you something about your problem with pride, if you're unwilling to do that. So I would really strongly see if you can see any similarities with Nebuchadnezzar. So what I want to do is just go through the story. I want to show 4 symptoms of pride. What pride makes you think and look at the world. And then we'll see how Nebuchadnezzar had those 4 same symptoms, and then we'll see how he comes out of it at the end. That is the plan. Let's pick up reading in Daniel chapter 4, verse 19. In verses 4 through 18, Nebuchadnezzar kind of retells his dream, but Daniel's going to give a synopsis of it. So for the sake of time, we're just going to start in verse 19, but I would urge you to go back and read the whole story in your own time. Daniel chapter 4, starting in verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. And the king answered and said to Belteshazzar, "Let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you." Belteshazzar answered and said, "My lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation be for your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that it reached to the heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, in which there was food for all, under which the beasts of the field found shade, and whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reached to the heaven, your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, 'Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave a stump of its roots in the earth, and bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with him in the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him.' This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon the Lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men. Your dwelling shall be in the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he wills. And as it was commanded to leave a stump of the root of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed to you from the time you know that the heaven rules." Stop right there for now. Here we see the first symptom of pride. Pride does not let what a person knows influence his heart. Nebuchadnezzar, because of his pride, does not let what he knows influence his heart. Knowledge and understanding are two different things. Nebuchadnezzar has come in contact with the God of Daniel, Yahweh, many times before, and grown in his understanding of him. In chapter 2, verse 47, he explains this of God. He says, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of lords, and the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." And then chapter 3, verse 28, after Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were saved from the fiery furnace, he says this about God in verse 28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted him and set aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore I make any decree, any people, any nation, or language that speaks anything against God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn from limb to limb, and their houses laid ruined, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way." And so Nebuchadnezzar has learned a lot about this God. And so wouldn't you think that after seeing these wonderful feats from God through his servants, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that if he sent a dream to you about you being brought low, that you may pay attention to what it says? You think that you would understand that and really listen to it, because everything that this God has done so far has come true or has saved his people. But oftentimes it's said that the longest 18 inches is between your head and your heart, between what you know and how you make your decisions about your life and how you look at the world. You may know a lot about doctrine and theology, but do you actually let what you know influence how you live your day-to-day life, what you say, what you act, the way you go about your life? Those are two different things. And I think it was mentioned in Bible class, or it may have been last week, that I think it's today in this morning's Bible class, that there's a lot of people that go around and look like Christians, just like Samson looked like, a man of God. But he didn't really let those outer lookings really influence who he was, or how he saw the world, or the decisions that he made. And Nebuchadnezzar did not do the same as well. And so really, when it comes to pride, is you may know all these great things, but who is actually ruling your life? Nebuchadnezzar knew a lot of true things about Daniel's God, but he still firmly sat in the throne of his heart. And who sits in the throne of your heart? And if it's anyone besides God, if it's yourself, you may have a symptom of pride. The second symptom of pride is not listening to warnings. If you look at the next verse 27, Daniel gives the king a warning in Daniel chapter 4, verse 27. "Therefore, king, let my counsel be acceptable among you, to break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity." I will say this. Let's break from the pride aspect right now, and let's focus on Daniel, because I want to just take it aside. How great is Daniel right here? How loving is Daniel? How many Jewish people would have just said, "Yeah, good riddance. I hope this happens soon, and it happens for the entire life"? Because Nebuchadnezzar had taken Daniel away from his homeland, sacked his homeland, brought Daniel, his three friends, to his palace, indoctrinated them. When his three friends refused to serve his image, they threw his three friends into the fire. Daniel was almost killed in Daniel chapter 2 because the people couldn't tell Nebuchadnezzar's dream. He's been threatened, and his friends have been threatened to be killed by this guy multiple times, beyond just the sacking of his city and the exile that he's been put under. I wonder how many Jewish people, or how many people in general, would be nice to this guy. And genuinely, it seems like he cares for him. He starts this whole text that we read in verse 19 talking about he was dismayed and that he wished it was for the enemies, but instead it was for him. I don't think a lot of people would be that kind or that nice. And this theme that we've talked about throughout Daniel about standing firm but loving well, Daniel does that again. He stands firm. He speaks what God wants him to speak. He gives the interpretation, but he says, please turn from your ways, do righteousness and show mercy and turn from your pride. Do these things so that maybe God will spare you from this judgment to come. He seems to have a genuine concern about Nebuchadnezzar. And because of that, because he is nice, and because of how God has worked through him and his friends, we will see one of the greatest changes in a character throughout this book. And that's Nebuchadnezzar as he slowly learns about God, and eventually he becomes a God believer. And at the end of this, you will see him just kind of give a fully devoted message about how great God is. Because Daniel was not afraid to love well and be firm at the same time. But despite Daniel's concern, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't listen, or at least doesn't listen for long. Because at the end of 12 months, he's going to be struck down and this judgment will come upon him because he didn't give up his pride. Pride is a hard habit to kick. It's hard to see in the first place, like we talked about, because those who have a problem with pride don't see themselves as having a problem with pride. But it's harder to keep away from a long time because it kind of gradually sneaks back up on you. And it's not something that's tangible, that you can see yourself doing. If you have a problem with greed or materialism, and you say, okay, I want to get that right, you get rid of everything, you can see the slow progression of stuff building up in your life, and you're slowly collecting things and collecting money and that kind of stuff. You can kind of see that to a certain extent. Or if you have a problem with lust or pornography, you can see yourself doing that. You can see there's something tangible there that you can see yourself sliding into. Pride is deceptive, though, because it seems like there's nothing tangible that you can look on and say, that person has a problem with pride, and yet everyone else around you knows that you have a problem with pride. It's one of those things that is highly deceptive. And it's really secret poison that destroys you. And that's why we have to be really focused on destroying it, to see, okay, I was prideful in that conversation. What I said in this way or how I thought this way, that was thinking too highly of myself. And nip those in the bud when we have those coming to us. Pride is a hard habit to kick. It is even harder to destroy and get rid of completely. It's a continual effort to really keep it down. Which kind of ties to the next symptom. Pride mistakes God's work for your own. It's looking at God's work and saying, this is my work. You can see Nebuchadnezzar doing this in verse 28 through 30. Daniel chapter 4, verse 28 through 30. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And the king answered and said, Is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power, as a royal residence for all the glory of my majesty? Nebuchadnezzar is walking at a very high point in the city, and he sees all that he has built. And he says, my glory and my everything I have done. And Babylon was very impressive. From our records, from archaeology, it was super impressive. We have an ancient account of 126 pages of writing about the impressive buildings in Babylon. The palace we have in both archaeology and accounts of was huge and opulent. There were great gardens all around the city, including the Hanging Gardens, which were one of the 7 wonders of the world. There was an impressive network of walls and moats that kept the city secure. There was a double wall around the city. One was 11 feet wide, and the other was 20 feet wide, thick. And each had a defense tower every 60 feet. And then outside of that was another double wall that was 25 and 23 feet thick. I mean, you think 25 feet thick, that's massive. That's more than just the ceiling here, probably double this ceiling. And it spanned 17 miles around the city. And at points at this wall was over 40 feet high. There was estimated more than 15 million bricks with his name and his title on it that were built for specific monuments and statues and specific things and specific roads throughout the city. 15 million bricks with your name on it. And so he looks around this great city, and that doesn't even take into account all the different nations and worlds and the statues that he's put up in all these other places and in the known world at that time. And so he looks at all of this, and you notice the pronouns. He said, "Is this not great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty?" It's all self-seen. I did this for my majesty. And take for a second God out of it. He doesn't even give credit to his father, which was responsible for conquering most of the kingdom in which Nebuchadnezzar has. He doesn't give credit to the great generals or Daniel and his friends, or like anyone else any soldiers, generals, leaders that helped him govern or manage or conquer any of this land. But he says, "This is all me. Look at what I have done. I have done all of this." And this he doesn't give any credit to God whatsoever. And this kind of parallels to what the sermon was last week. About it's easy to think that all the stuff that we have, our cars, our houses, the clothes on our back, the food that we eat, is all produced by our own hands. That is worked for our jobs. These houses that we built, that we framed, that we paid someone to frame, whatever the case may be, the cars that we paid for, these are the things that I have hard worked for, that I have obtained through my hard labor. And we don't give any credit to anyone else, much less God. And the struggle with that is to begin to think that those are our things in which we can use how we want us to use without giving any thought to anyone else, including God. It is a symptom of pride. We should never look at our things as our own, but only borrowed from God, used for his purposes and for the love of edification of each other. If you have that perspective, so much more changes in your life, and you become more humble in the way that you act and less prideful. And then finally, the final symptom of pride that we see is in Daniel chapter 4, verse 31. Verse 31, while the words were still in his mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven from among men, your dwelling shall be for the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules with the kingdom's men, and gives to whom he wills." Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from among the men, and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. If you ask Nebuchadnezzar in verse 30, how long do you think his kingdom and his kingship would last over Babylon? If you asked him in verse 30, how how long do you think this kingdom would last? He'd probably think the kingdom would last forever and he would have a long life. There's no threats. There's nothing he's afraid of. But how long did it last for him? While the words were still in his mouth saying how great he was being humbled by God. See, pride, and this is the fourth symptom, pride makes the mistake of not understanding how fleeting life is. There's a sense of immortality, invincibility in the things that we do. Oh, I won't be caught doing this. I won't suffer the consequences of these behaviors. I'm above these things. You see this a lot with people that have become very famous or great at sports or rich, that they think they are above the rules, that the consequences won't catch up to them. But that's not how it is. It wasn't very long before Nebuchadnezzar was humbled and all that he has was taken away from him. Even his very mind was taken away from him. And if God could take this much for someone who is far greater than anyone here, I imagine, unless someone's holding out on me, if God could take this much away from someone who is great as Nebuchadnezzar, who ruled half the world at that time, what makes you think that he can't do the same thing to us? We live our life like nothing can happen, that the things that we have won't go away. But how quick life is fleeting. How quick things go away. How one phone call, one doctor visit, one thing in our life can just change our life completely. We should live lives of gratefulness and thankfulness always, knowing that all the stuff and all the things that we have up to our health, our family, and our mind are because God sees it fit for us to have those. And those are not our own things to own, but it's God's. And I think of the words of Job, which he said once he lost everything that he had in life. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised forever." And that is the same attitude we must have. Job was not proud, but Nebuchadnezzar was. And he was humbled all the same. These are the four symptoms of pride, and hopefully those things don't apply to you, but if they do, take a firm look at yourself. Do you mistake God's work for your own? Do you not understand how much you've been given and how quickly it can go away? Is it hard for you to, from what you know, to affect your life? Or do you not listening to the warnings of those loved ones around you who are trying to make your life better and warn you of the consequences to come? There was a Hall of Fame speech by Michael Jordan. I don't know if you've heard of him. In 2009, when he was inducted to the Hall of Fame, he gave a speech on, it was like 23 minutes long, and he gave a speech on how great he was, basically. He remarked about the coach that had benched him while he was in high school. He remarked about how he constantly overcame the odds. He said how much that the players win championships, not the GM or the people that manage the team. He talked about everyone that doubted him or went against him. And Michael Jordan always could perceive a chip on his shoulder even though there was nothing there. And he even ended it by remarking about his kids having to live in his shadow and how tough that must be for them. Well, it was very interesting that on that very same day, there was another Hall of Fame speech given by David Robinson. That same 2009 Hall of Fame inductee speech. And it was only 7 minutes long. And what he did was he thanked everyone that helped him. He thanked the coaches that saw promise in him. He thanked the Naval Academy for trusting him. The coaches and the GMs of the Spurs and the teammates who helped him become who he was. And then he took time at the end of his speech to really thank each of his kids for how blessed he was to be their father, how great they were in their own right. And they ended by quoting and telling the story of the 10 lepers, saying that he didn't want to be those other 9 that didn't come back and thank Jesus for everything he's done for them. Those are 2 totally different people. What is the difference between those who are prideful and those who are humble? The prideful look in. They look at themselves. It's a lot of me and I. And even when it's negative, I can't believe what happened to me, I can't believe this bad thing happened to me, that is still pride. If all you can talk about is me, no matter positive or negative, trying to talk about your accomplishments or your defeats, that is still me focused. That is still pride. So the prideful look in, but the humble look up. And that's how the story ends. Verse 34, at the end of my days, Nebuchadnezzar lifted my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Lord Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures for a generation to generation. All inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, as he does according to his will among the host of heaven. And among the inhabitants of the earth, none can stay his hand, or say, what have you done? At the same time, my reason returned to me. And for my glory, my kingdom, my majesty and splendor was returned to me. My counselors, the Lord, sought me, and I established my kingdom. Still more greater was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven. For all his works are right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. The proud looks in, but the humble looks up. They look to God as the supplier of everything, that all his ways are right and everything he does is just. There's a quote in James when it says, God makes the proud bend, but gives grace to the humble. And I think that's every one of us, because whether it's in this life or after we die in judgment, every person will bow before God. Everyone will. Whether that's willingly on this earth or in fear and reverence in the next, every knee would bow. Because God makes the humble, or makes the proud humble. And he will do the same to every one of us, every prideful person that has ever lived on the face of the earth on Judgment Day. Do you want to be humbled now, or do you want to be humbled then? The choice is yours. I hope that if pride has been an issue for you, you'll seriously look at it and you'll change it in your life. And look up at the creator and maker of everything. If we can do anything for you this morning, if we can help you in any spiritual way, come forward as we stand, as we sing.